So now we're going to hone in on the conflict between the Israelis and the Palestinians. And just remembering that we've built up a language, a way of understanding what's going on in Israel through these 4 questions. So when we look at our conflict with the Palestinians, we're also going to be looking at to be, about the way in which this affects and is part of our security concerns about life and death. We're going to be asking questions about peoplehood, about Jewish peoplehood, our beliefs and our values. We're going to be assessing this situation in relation to freedom, in particular democracy and rights. And of course, we're going to also look at the questions about land, about borders and territory and whose land is whose. And this whole section, we're going to call it the O word. And we're calling it the O word because this word occupation is somewhat incendiary to some people. And what's most interesting about the word occupation when it's applied to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is that it actually has at least 3 different definitions, 3 different meanings. And so the 3 different uses of the word occupation by different people have different implications. So we're going to start off with a bit of history. The United Nations came up with a partition plan, a way of partitioning the land of Israel, or the land of Palestine as it was known at the time. The bluish bit was going to be the Jewish state, and the browny beigey bit was going to be the Arab state, and then there was going to be the corpus separatum, a separate kind of status for Jerusalem. This was offered and was rejected by all Arab forces and Arab countries around Palestine. The Jewish Zionist organizations accepted the plan, but a war broke out because it was rejected by the Arab armies. So from Egypt, from Transjordan, from Syria, from Lebanon, there is an invasion attacking the places which the UN had set aside for elements of the Jewish state. The Jews then responded, the Zionists responded, and now by July, the Israeli army has now established itself as a country and responds and counterattacks. So we've kind of changed colour. All the beigey colours on the right, that's where Israel is now in control of, and the green areas are where Arab control is. And if we see that there's this green line, this is the line which was drawn on a map to signify the ceasefire line between the Israeli army and the Jordanian army. This is a ceasefire line known as the Green Line. Everything over to the right of the Green Line, to the east of the Green Line, and the west of the Jordan River, the west of the Jordan River, the west bank of the Jordan River. Then what happens is that 2 years later, Jordan, who is in control of the west bank of the Jordan River anyway, annexes that area, basically says this is part of Jordan. Then in 1967, we have a war which breaks out. The war breaks out known as the 6-Day War. Arab forces from around Israel attack, and Jordan attacks from the West Bank. This is really significant because an attack from the West Bank can cut Israel in half, basically. It's, about 20 minutes drive from the West Bank to Tel Aviv. Israel fights back, and in this incredible, miraculous victory in 6 days, wins the war and takes over more land. Israel takes control of the West Bank, of Gaza, of the Golan Heights up in the north, and all of the Sinai Desert, which was owned by Egypt. That's in 1967. There's then an offer from Israel, we'll withdraw from all these lands if you, Egypt, Syria, Jordan, etc., will make peace with us, and that is rejected, and so Israel continues to hold on to these lands. So if we can see the dark yellowy bit, that's basically the land which the UN, the world community, has agreed that that's part of Israel. The lighter yellow are areas that Israel is in control of, but that the rest of the world does not accept that this is part of the state of Israel. And we're going to be focusing on this area, Judea and Samaria, or the West Bank. Judea and Samaria are the Jewish biblical terms for this area. West Bank, as we've said, is a recognition of the geographical place of this area on the western bank of the Jordan. So the light yellow area, Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, that light yellow area is in Israeli control, but it's not in what is internationally recognized Israel. This is the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, and this is the area we're going to start talking about when we use the word occupation. And to begin with, word one, if you like, we're going to begin with the Israeli right-wing perspective on this word, the occupation. And we're going to discover that the right-wing perspective, word one, for the right-wing, occupation is all about land. And it goes like this: if it's my land, then I'm not occupying it, it's just mine. And we're going to be using some of the frameworks created by Micha Goodman, a brilliant thinker in Israel. He brought out a book called Catch 67, which I really recommend reading if you want to dig deeper. So we're going to use a few of his analyses, and we're also going to challenge a few of them too. So if we're looking at this area, Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, and if we're looking at it from word one, from the right-wing perspective, it all begins with land. This area, Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, these are areas that the Jordanians were holding and they annexed in 1950, and then from there they attacked us in 1967. So these are areas that they've attacked us twice for no good reason. So that's why we, Israel, are still in control of Judea and Samaria, because the Jordanians attacked us so many times from that place, and we offered to make peace, and the Arab countries said no. And so let's understand that in terms of 4HQ, Micha Goodman is saying, because of our security, because we were being attacked from this area, that is why we are now in control of that area, because it would be dangerous not to be there. And this answers only half the issue. Because the question is, why do we have Jewish civilian houses over the Green Line in Judea, Samaria, the West Bank? This is Ariel. This is a settlement over the Green Line in the West Bank, Judea and Samaria. It's not a gathering of tents, and it's as far inside the Green Line as Tel Aviv is outside of the Green Line. So why are we there? Why do we have civilians living there? It's time for us to look at an ancient map and to do a Kahoot. So as the Kahoot has told us, where was the Ark of the Covenant housed before it was moved to Jerusalem? In Shiloh. The temples were built in Jerusalem. Jacob's ladder was in Bet-El or Bethel. Joshua and his folks with the shofarot knocked down the walls of Jericho. Abraham, Sarah and others were buried in Me'arat HaMachpelah, the cave of Machpelah in Hebron. And where is Joseph buried? In Shechem. So look at all these orange circles. The central narrative of the Bible, the central narrative of our national story, all takes place in the West Bank, Judea and Samaria. And so what we're doing there is we're saying this land, it's not just that we are there because of security questions, we're also building our settlements in the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, because it's our land. So the right wing are going to say to you, you can't say that we're occupying this land. It's called Judea. Judea. The name Judea comes from the tribe of Judah. That's where the word Jew comes from. It's always been our land. How on earth can you say that we're occupying? We're just returning to our land. And for you to say that the land of Israel, that central piece where all these important things happened to us, is outside the internationally accepted borders of the state of Israel is not acceptable. So as we've learned, the right-wing perspective on the occupation is that we're in control of the land because of our security to be, and we're also there because it's our land. We are in our land. And because it's our land, it isn't really an occupation at all. Now we're going to look at O word 2, the O word from the perspective of the Israeli left and moderate Palestinians looking at the conflict, because they're going to say it's not about land, it's about freedom, and in particular the freedoms and the rights of the Palestinians living in the West Bank, Judea and Samaria. So here's a really small example and very specific example of the differences between the rights of Israeli citizens and Palestinians living over the Green Line. Israel's basic law, this is one of the fundamental laws in Israel, a little bit like our part of our future constitution. In 1992, we passed this law which says you can't arrest somebody for no reason and imprison them for no reason, and you can't barge into someone's house with no reason and without their consent. These are laws which apply to everyone, Jewish or Arab, Muslim, Druze, Palestinian, Bedouins. Everybody in the dark yellow area is protected by this law. However, over the Green Line, in the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, only Jewish Israelis are protected by this law. Effectively, every 5 years, the Knesset votes once again to say that any Jewish Israeli living over the Green Line is protected by Israeli law. But any Palestinian living in this same area is not protected by this law. In fact, any Palestinian living in this area is subject to administrative detention, which means that the army can arrest you if it feels that you are a security threat, and you can be arrested for 6 months without trial, without even being told what the charges are against you, and this detention can be extended for another 6 months and for another 6 months. So the freedoms of Palestinians in this area are very different from the freedoms of Jews in this area. And now let's look at the third use of the word occupation. And this use suggests that the occupation did not begin with the Six-Day War when Israel occupied or conquered the West Bank, Judea and Samaria. This suggestion, this O word 3, says that the occupation began in 1948 when Israel won the War of Independence and the Palestinians underwent the Nakba. Here's the dialogue. So when did the occupation begin? Answer: the occupation began in 1948 with the Nakba. This is at the establishment of the State of Israel, not in 1967, not with the Six-Day War. And when will the occupation be over? When Palestinians control the land taken in 1948, as in when Palestinians control the State of Israel. The Nakba, the catastrophe in Arabic, is the word used to describe the way that Palestinians experienced the Israeli War of Independence in 1948. And again, using small examples, let's just give the numbers which are uncontested. 1 year after the War of Independence, the Nakba, there were now 711,000 Palestinian refugees outside of Israel, with only 160,000 remaining inside, which means not only is that a huge number of refugees, but it also means that the whole makeup of the land has changed. Within 2 years, the non-Jewish population of this area has dropped by 90%. So Palestinians, from being 68% of the population, are now 18% of the overall population. And it pretty much remains that to this day. So Palestinians shifted from being a majority to a minority pretty much overnight. And that's one aspect of what Palestinians see as the Nakba, that if the land was not taken from them, they were taken away from the land. And so all Zionist actions from this perspective, whether we attack Gaza, defend ourselves in Gaza, take control of houses in East Jerusalem, irrelevant of the individual reasons, they are all simply an ongoing Nakba. It's an ongoing process of the Zionists to take the Palestinians away from their land. 1948. And so we've got three different understandings of the word occupation. Number one, ownership of the land over the Green Line. That's one understanding of an occupation. Are we occupying the land? Legally speaking, says the right, we're not occupying the land. Number two, the occupation is about the freedom and rights of Palestinians over the Green Line, and in which case it's impossible to argue that there is no occupation. And a third definition, the occupation is the existence of the Jewish state of Israel, and for the occupation to end, the Jewish state of Israel must disband. So it's really clear. We've worked it out. Three understandings of the word occupation. O1 is about land, O2 is about freedom, and O3 is about the Jewish state of Israel. That would be easy. However, there's the yes but coming. Because the left are going to say, yes, but that's not quite right. And the right are going to say, yeah, well, that's not quite right. And advocates for the rejectionist O word 3 are also going to give you a yes, but that's not the whole story. The left-wingers will say you can't separate between land and freedom. When we control the land, that affects Palestinians' freedom. Back in 1994, we signed a deal with the Palestinians to begin a peace process. And to begin this peace process, we said that we were going to divide the land temporarily. So this was going to be a temporary situation for about 4 or 5 years, that the Palestinian communities were going to be defined as areas A and B, and where the Jews were living, that would be area C. And what do we mean by this? That areas A and B, the brownish areas, would be pretty much in the control of the Palestinians, and area C, all the rest of the land, that would be controlled by Israel. This was a temporary idea, and it's got stuck there for over a generation. So we're still, back from 1994-95, we're still in this situation whereby the West Bank is divided up into these blobs. And if you add in the military zones where no one can enter, the nature reserves where no one can build, the security barrier that Israel has built to maintain its security, and the area around it where no one can live, what we end up looking at is that this is the area of land that Palestinians are free to move through. And every time you have to move from one yellow blob to the next yellow blob, that means you need to move through areas controlled by Israel's army. And so the freedom of movement of any Palestinian is supremely limited. If you want to go from the blob at the top of the map down to the blob at the bottom of the map, you've got no way of doing it without passing through several checkpoints manned by Israeli soldiers. And so the left is saying, you see, the moment we are controlling the land, that inevitably is now affecting the freedom of the people living there. And this way of dividing up the West Bank was very powerfully summed up by this cartoon by Mohammed Saba'ani, a Palestinian cartoonist. So the left is saying there's a direct linkage between land and freedom. You can't separate the two. The comeback from the right is, okay, so if you're saying that we can't come to any kind of compromise, that we can't be there at the same time as the Palestinians are there, so we need to just hand it over, we just need to withdraw. Well, we have bad experiences of simply withdrawing from land controlled by Palestinians. In the Second Intifada back in 2000, 2004, Immediately after we were trying to make peace and sign a deal at Camp David, we got attacked by huge numbers of suicide bombings. When we withdrew from Lebanon in the year 2000, Hezbollah attacked us. When we withdrew from Gaza in 2005, Hamas attacked us from the very places that we withdrew from. Every time we hand land over to the sole control of the Palestinians, they attack us from that piece of land. So it is about security as well as land. We are there because it's our land and because it is unsafe for us to hand over the land to Palestinians. And now the caveat from the Palestinian perspective, the Palestinians will talk about 4HQ. And they will say, look, the way that you Israelis are answering your 4 Hatikva questions are preventing us from answering ours. Because in order for you to be safe, for you to look after your Jewish peoplehood, for you to be free and democratic in your land, it means that we are unsafe because your army is running free among our people. Our peoplehood is somewhat limited. Our freedoms are non-existent. And our access to our land is severely limited. So until you get your answers to the 4 Hatikva questions in line with our answers, we're never going to be able to sort this out. And so we're left with this question. It's not enough to say end the occupation now. We want us to be clear about which occupation and how.